Hello everyone, I am Anugreh Sehtya, co-founder of Serenico Labs. Before I start, I'd just like to thank the organizers of Hyper Games Conference for inviting me to their event. Today I'll be sharing and discussing about exploring the essential elements of a puzzle game. So if you guys have any question or just want to say hi, these are my details. I might not be there for the Q&A session. So if you want to just ask any question or just want to say hi, you can reach out to me over my email address or my LinkedIn. So the topics that we'll be covering today are, so for first we'll be talking about us, Serenico Labs as a company, what I do at Serenico Labs. Then we'll be moving on to the puzzle game scenario in 2023. Why does it make sense to do hyper casual puzzles in 2023 as compared to the other subgenres that are present in hyper casual? What are the main components of a good puzzle game? What is the main recipe that makes a good puzzle game? Then we'll be discussing about the ideation techniques and resources that you guys can use to benchmark and create your own puzzle ideas. Then we'll be concluding about whatever we have learned in this session. So about us, we actually started as a studio in 2020 with just two people, that is me and my co-founder Devansh. Since then, it has been like 2.5 years, and since then we have been able to build 60 plus games, 60 plus hyper casual prototypes. And since the 2.5 years of our working, we have been able to publish two of our games with Game Jam. The first game is called Shape in 3D, which is a puzzle game, and the second game is called Hot Potato. So Hot Potato, for a fun fact, was also done with in collaboration with Snapchat and Bitmoji. And for those of you who do not know Bitmoji, Bitmoji is a company which generally has their own, makes their own avatar of your own self, 2D avatars, 3D avatars. So we were one of the first, Hot Potato was one of the first games to have a 3D avatar of your own self inside of a game that you could use and play. So that is what we did with Game Jam and Snapchat. That was a fun thing. But since then, we have been working with leading publishers globally. Currently, we are a team of 12 people, but hopefully that number will be increasing soon. All right. So the puzzle game scenario in 2023 and why does it make sense to do puzzle games in 2023? So let's just first look at the current hyper casual market scenario that is happening right now. As you all might be aware, the current market trend is moving towards games that have a longer playtime than what it used to be like an year or a 2 year ago. And that is why new genres like arcade idol, etc., are coming into the market and making their own space in the hyper casual category. It's getting harder to scale the normal hyper casual games with the same metrics as it used to be before. So there's a clear demand that is in the market for good marketability and a significantly higher engagement and retention. And now that we have an idea about the current scenario of the market, let's take a look at the puzzle games. So puzzle games now have the highest playtime as compared to the other subgenres in the hyper casual industry. For a fact, puzzle is the only subgenre where the playtime per user has not been decreasing. So if you take any other subgenre, whether it be runners or simulation, the playtime and the retention of these genres have been decreasing, but puzzle is the only subgenre where the playtime of this subgenre hasn't been decreasing. Moreover, these kind of games also have a longer term retention as compared to the other subgenres. What that means is that puzzle games generally have a longer lifespan. A lot of hypercasual games, like when they release, they go up in the chart, but they fall like relatively fast. It is significantly better with puzzle games because they have a longer lifespan. And puzzle games have, I guess, a much more reach. Typically, you can attract more female users as compared to any action or choice-based game because puzzles are generally very mass market. So basically, looking at all of this, I genuinely think that studios should start consider trying puzzle games at this point of time because the market really is demanding games which have a good marketability and also games which have high engagement, high retention. So let us now just divide puzzle into three major categories. So the first one is physics based, second is non-physics based, and the third one is action based. So let's move on. Let's first discuss the physics based category. So what physics based puzzle is that, like, every action that is performed by the player in a physics based puzzle game will result in an action that is generated by the game's physics engine. So this means that the behavior of the objects and the forces within the game environment is determined by the forces by the physical principles. So as a result, players must take into account how different objects and forces will interact with each other. So Happy Class is a very good example of a puzzle game. Even Castle Raid has a minor physics based aspect inside of it. So what are non-physics based puzzles? Non-physics based puzzles are generally like these kind of games often follow a more deterministic approach, meaning that the outcome of the game and the player's performance is heavily influenced by the order in which they make their moves. Uh, so, for example, if we see this collect 'em all, or for that matter, in the sorting game, it is kind of a deterministic game because if you want to win the game, if you want to clear the level, you need to be having a correct order of moves that you need to follow. So that is what is a non-physics based puzzle game. And in this game, the player must consider, like, and execute their moves in a specific order to achieve the best result. So that is basically what it is. Then comes the action based puzzles. These puzzles can either be physics based or non physics based, but in these kind of games, you're always competing with someone else, whether it be a fake multiplayer or whether it be a real multiplayer. But generally, these kind of puzzle games have some kind of a competition happening inside of that game. And now that we have divided puzzles into these three categories, let's take a look at the commonalities of all of these three categories or the games that I've mentioned. If you see closely, all of these games have a very intuitive control. So, for example, if we talk about Collect 'em All or Castle Raid, you immediately understand what your goal is and what are the controls that you need to use. There are no complex controls like joystick or anything. You just need to you just see the frame and you just understand that you need to drag or do something else inside of these games. So these games are very intuitive in terms of controls. Secondly, the majority of these games have a choice-based gameplay that is very clear. And lastly, if you look closely, these games have a very minimal and a simple art, wherein they are able to explain the goal of the game, even if the user just looks at the screenshot. So if you see Collect them all, for example, the goal is mentioned at the top, and by this particular image, you are able to understand what you really need to do in this game. You need to make a chain, you need to blast the balls, and then you need to blast these number of specific balls of this specific color. That is very understandable. If we see the sorting mock-up or the sorting image, even this is very easy to understand. And the art style of this game is very simplistic. It is very minimal. A goal is present, an approach is present, the mechanic is clear. So that makes that is what is common in all of these kind of games. All right. So the main components of a puzzle game are: the first one is core mechanic, the second is visuals, and the third is progression. These three things make a good puzzle game. So let's start by discussing the core mechanic. So what generally is the core mechanic, or what generally are mechanics? Mechanics are these underlying rules that govern how the game works, simply. So this includes the game's controls, rules, objectives, how the player interacts with the game's element. It is kind of the backbone of the game and is responsible for creating the challenge and providing the user with a sense of progression as they complete more difficult levels. So that is what basically a mechanic is. Then visuals. This includes the graphic, the animation, the juiciness, the overall appearance of the game. So it is very important for a puzzle game, or for that matter any game, to create a visually appealing and immersive experience for the player, as well as helping them to communicate the game rules and the gameplay. Third one is progression. This refers to how the game becomes more difficult over time, providing a sense of a challenge or and some kind of an achievement for the player. This can include increasing the difficulty of the puzzles or adding new elements or new mechanics into the gameplay or increasing the complexity of the rules. That depends on what your progression system of your game looks like. And the progression system is basically what keeps the player engaged and motivated to continue playing the game for a longer time. So together, these components work to create an engaging and a really enjoyable experience for the player while also challenging them to improve their skills and progress through the game levels. All right, so let's discuss the mechanics. What generally is required from the mechanics for a puzzle game? The mechanics should be very extremely simple. A good puzzle mechanic should be simple to understand and follow. Like there's no questions on that. And even for the players like who are new to the game, they should very easily understand what the mechanic is. So that it makes it easier for the users or the players to get started with the game, but it should still be challenging enough to require skill and practice to master. So it should be easy to understand but hard to master. Then we move on to intuitive. The puzzle mechanics should feel very natural to the player and making it easy for them to figure out what to do without the need of any extensive onboarding or any instruction. Obviously, an onboarding is important, but uh, what makes a great mechanic is that the player intuitively understands what the player needs to do inside of that game. That that is a that is that is an example of a good, or that is a sign of a good mechanic. So an intuitive mechanic makes the game accessible to a wider audience and keeps the player engaged in the game for a longer time. Thirdly is addictiveness. The mechanic should be very addictive. A good puzzle mechanic should be addictive, making the player just want to keep playing the game again and again to improve their skills inside of the gameplay. This can be achieved by incorporating elements of challenge, skill building, progression, allowing the players to see their progress and feel a sense of accomplishment. So these are the three things that these are the main three signs that let us know that what a good puzzle mechanic looks like. There are many puzzle mechanics in the market that work really well. There are sorting, there are merging. Uh, so you guys should definitely look into that. For example, as I was saying, sorting. This is kind of very simple to do. What you just basically have to do is you have to tap on one bottle and then you have to tap on the other bottle. This feels very intuitive. And once you look at this particular frame or this particular screenshot, you immediately understand that you need to sort the colors of the water. So that is a great example of a good mechanic that can happen inside of a game. And even with connect and match, even with collect them all, this particular mechanic is very understandable. You need to make a chain, but it's hard to master because it depends upon your skill how long of a chain you are making at one particular point of time. And they are also rewarding the user when the user makes a large enough chain. So that is a very good example of having a good mechanic inside of a game. Then we move on to visuals and effects. So a good visual should have a clear and a simple representation that is easy for the player to understand. This allows for a quick recognition of goals and performance within the game. The visual should be visually rewarding for the player's input so that no matter what the outcome is, the player should be getting a feedback uh, visually. Even if the outcome is wrong for the player, the feedback needs to be there. The rewarding factor needs to be there for the player visually. And additionally, it's important for the visual to be CPI friendly, meaning that they should be very minimal. This helps the cost of creating the game low and more accessible. It makes it more accessible to the mass market. I think all of us know that. So basically, keeping the puzzle games very minimal. We do not need to make this kind of a high like an archetypal game. The general art style of a puzzle game is very minimal, keeping it minimal but still able to understand, like explain what the goal of the game is. So that is a good example uh, of a good visual of a good puzzle game. Then we move on to the progression. I think progression is one of the most important parts of a good puzzle game, and it is one of the most important aspect of puzzle games because it keeps the player engaged and motivated to continue playing. Uh, so if we talk about balance, difficulty increase, the progression system should like gradually increase the difficulty of the puzzles, allowing the players to gradually increase their skills and build their confidence. Too much of a jump in a difficulty can be very demotivating, and too little can lead to like boredom. So that is very important and actually very tough to balance out. Third is choice. Providing players with a choice in the progression allows them to feel that they are in the control of the experience of the whole game. So they can choose to take on more challenging puzzles or stick with the easier ones depending on their skill levels. This this sense of control keeps the players engaged in the game. So they have the choice of make like playing harder levels, or they have the choice of playing easier levels. It's up to them. But the player should always feel that they have the choice of progression that they would like inside of the game. So yeah, basically these 3 points are the points that generally make a good puzzle. These are the main three components that are generally required for a good puzzle. But where do you source the ideas, or where do you get the ideas for these particular puzzle games? What I personally have and what we personally at Serenico Labs have experienced is these three things could be your major inspirations for getting new ideas for puzzle games. First of all, it's hyper casualizing old concepts as in concepts that have that came out like 5 to 7 years ago, or for that matter, even 3 years ago, and thinking about how you can reuse the mechanic and come up with a completely different game from that. So this is the first thing that you guys could do. Secondly, hyper casual game hits, like the casual hyper casualizing the casual game hits. So there are many casual games that get like to like 50 million downloads or 100 million downloads, and they have like huge in-app purchases, right? But you must have seen that many of the casual games have also a very simple and a very fun mechanic. How you can use that mechanic, extract that mechanic from casual game, hyper casualize it, remove all the meta from the casual game, and figure out a way to completely make that casual game into a hyper casual game so that you can guys can have the playtime of a casual game while maintaining the marketability of a hyper casual game. The third one is merging CPI friendly features, thinking of like many CPI many CPI-able concepts, and then joining them with the puzzle. So let's talk more about these in detail. First, let's talk about hyper casualizing old concepts. Where can you find out old hyper casual concepts? First of all, you guys can find many of concepts on miniclip.com, itch.io, addicting games. There are many number of websites available on the internet which hosts games. And they have been hosting games since like 10, 15 years since the time internet came out. So there are a huge number of directories that you could probably play, and then perhaps think of how you can use that particular game and make a game of your own with less complexity and better art style. Old puzzles, as I said, you guys could probably play old puzzles which have been released 5 to 7 years ago. Think of a better progression. Think of a better feature that you could add inside of the mechanic, and then try to relaunch that in the market and see if the marketability is still maintained or not. The third one is indie games. Indie games can be either old indie games or the newer ones as well. These indie games are developed by individual developers, obviously, and generally these indie games kind of have not a very good art, or sometimes do not have a very good uh, mechanic or a complexity. So there are sometimes a lot of loopholes that you could clearly see inside of the games of indies, even though the concept can be really good. So what you could possibly do is you could possibly see a lot of indie games for inspiration and think of how you can make the art style better of that game, how you could probably hyper casualize a particular indie game and then launch that in the market. But once you see all of these, how do you decide which one do you want to choose for your own particular ideation? Because you cannot test like 50 ideas per month, right? You do not, you need to be very specific about what you guys could test. So the main things that you should keep in mind is the game should not be too hard in terms of art or complexity. Uh, if you think the game is very art dependent, it's probably better that you do not hyper casualize it, because generally hyper casual games have a very minimal art style, right? And the second thing is complexity in terms of gameplay. The mechanics shouldn't be very complex. If even if the mechanic is complex and you cannot figure out a way to hyper casualize it like with a significantly, then it doesn't make sense for you to do that idea. So these are the two things that you need to keep in mind while choosing the idea that you want to do. And you also want to keep in mind that you are making a game for the mass market. Hyper casual is for everyone. Everyone should be able to understand the art style. Everyone should be able to understand the mechanic inside of that game. Whether it's a 8-year-old child or like a 60-year-old gentleman, everybody in between needs to understand that. So if you think that it doesn't fit the idea that you're coming up with while you find these isn't coming into this bracket, then you shouldn't probably be pursuing that particular idea. But just to give you one example of how like how one of the old hyper casual one of the old concept was hyper casualized. I think most of you must have played Two Dots, right? Two Dots was basically a game where you have to link the same colored balls and then you get bonus points. That was converted into Collect 'em All, and Collect 'em All is one of the successful puzzle games that are working in the market currently in the hyper casual by any hyper casual publisher. So what Collect 'em All did differently in this is that you couldn't move your linking to a diagonal part here. But Collect 'em All added that feature which added a lot of depth inside of that gameplay. That was the first thing that they did. Secondly, they also did is that they made a 2D concept into a 3D concept and added a lot of juiciness. So that was the second thing that they did. And once they were testing and they like got some initial results, then they added a layer of progression and many other things that are still currently in the game. So this is just one example of how an old concept was hyper casualized and then launched again. Secondly, hyper casualizing casual games. So there are many casual games in the market, right? And a lot of them have very easy to understand mechanics, very simple mechanics. What drives those particular games is a lot of meta, is a lot of progression, right? But what if you extract what if you understand why the player really sticks onto that game, why that particular mechanic is addictive, and then probably making that mechanic so much simpler that it gets to a really, really large audience. So that is the one thing that you could do. But where can you find these ideas? You can obviously find these in the top paid or the top grossing tabs of your app store, or even Apple Arcade for that matter. Exactly the same point, which ones to choose: fun to play and easy to understand the core mechanic. The core mechanic should be very easy to understand. Even if the mechanic of the casual game is hard to understand, you should probably be thinking of a way how you can probably make it easier to understand for the mass market, because hyper casual is played by everyone once again. So a good example for this is Zen Match, and this is a game called Block Breaker. I guess Voodoo published this. Zen Match is a game where you need to match three tiles. Basically, you just keep on clicking the same number of tiles until it matches three, and then it breaks. And you need to finish off this whole grid. I think all of you know Zen Match. Similarly, what happened is This particular game has the same gameplay of Zen Match, but they have hyper casualized the art style and added a juiciness, added so much juiciness that it ended up being published by Voodoo. In my assumption, I think this might have had a better, like a significantly better CPI and the marketability than Zen Match. And if it was able to maintain the playtime of a Zen Match game, then this probably is a good example of how we can come up with new ideas for a puzzle game while using uh, while seeing like the earlier casual games or the casual games that are working in the market. The third one is merge with marketable ideas. Look for all the good CPI games that worked well in the market in the past years. Identify what really worked for them for marketability in those years, and what was the main crux that was driving the low CPIs for them. Try extracting those learnings and apply them to your own puzzle, whether it be a theme, whether it be some kind of a simulation, whether it be juiciness. Just try and understand what made that particular game get a low CPI in the past years, and then try extracting that and then using it inside of your own puzzle game. So all in all, these are the three main things that you could use to benchmark and come up with your own puzzle ideas. And just to conclude, once again, at this particular point in market, it is very important again to have an high engagement, high playtime, longer term retention, and not even day 7, like even till day 14 and day 30. Uh, Puzzle games generally do show a longer term retention, so this is why it generally makes sense for us to do puzzle games. If we are able to crack a good marketability, then it is definitely a puzzle game has a lot of potential to generate revenue, like significantly higher revenue than a normal hyper casual game. So by that, I just want to conclude and I just want to thank everyone. If you guys have any questions again, just reach out to me over my email and this is my LinkedIn. Or if you just want to come say hi, I'd be happy to keep in touch. And thank you.